Hey guys, Brian from Boas here. I recently released a video titled "Why Are Reptile Prices So High?" and I got a lot of really good responses from you guys on that, a lot of feedback and discussion, and there were so many cool points that were raised that I decided that it would be worthwhile to do another follow-up video going into some more detail on some of these points. I'm also going to reveal the name of this beautiful anerythristic Paraguana peninsula boa that you guys voted on, so be sure to stick around to see what his name is. One point that came up a lot in the comments that I was a little dismayed about was, several people pointed out that the price of reptiles is largely due to the greed of the breeders, and that if they just weren't so greedy, then we wouldn't have these high reptile prices. And I had to really think about that, and what greed represents is something unethical. Someone is gouging the price using unscrupulous or unethical means, basically to rip somebody off. If somebody is selling something at the market price, however unreasonable the market price is, that's not greed. They're just selling at the market price, and it's the free market that determines the price. And think about, for example, real estate. People buy houses and then they sell them. Often they lose a lot of money, often they gain a lot of money. And like, say for example, you had bought a house 10 years ago in California where I live. Maybe you spent $500,000. Today you could pretty easily turn around and sell that same house for $1 million. $500,000 profit. For doing nothing but living in a house for 10 years. And so you might say, well, that's not fair, but there's a couple of things to consider. And so the first is, when it comes to greed, would somebody take their house that's worth $1 million and say, well, I don't want to be greedy. I only paid $500,000 for it, so I'm going to sell it for $800,000. The $300,000 profit, that's enough for me. I don't want to be greedy. Well, there's a couple issues with that, and there's a couple reasons why no one should do that or no one will do that. And so the first is the risk. When somebody buys a house or boa or anything, they're taking on a risk that they're not going to be successful because the value is not going to go up, or they're going to have some kind of issue that's going to preclude them from selling their house. It might burn down or something like that. And so if somebody bought a house at a different time in real estate history, say someone had bought around 2005 and then they were trying to sell in like 2010, they could have lost a huge amount of money. Okay, but they're forced to deal with it because that's the free market. If the value goes down, they don't have a choice. They have to sell at that time, and they take a beating. And a lot of people did with the real estate market. And so the other thing you have to consider is something called flippers. Okay, so if somebody sells a house or boa or anything really at well below the market price, what's going to happen is someone is going to buy that and they're going to turn around and sell it at the market price, and they're going to make their profit. So if somebody had sold their $1 million house for $800,000, you better believe someone would be buying it for the price so they could make that quick buck. And the same thing happens with reptiles. The last thing I want is for my animals to be rehomed real quickly because it's really stressful for them. It's really not good. I want to sell reptiles, my boas, to people who are going to have them for the long haul and really give them the care they want and not flip them. I've seen that several of my baby boas in the past have been sold to other people, and I know this because people that I didn't sell the boa to contact me for information, or I see pictures online. And I understand sometimes people have a change in plans, or they have a financial emergency, something like that. Things happen. I understand that. But I really would like, if whenever possible, for my boas to stay in the homes, the original buyer, and that they're committed to the long haul. So if I sold my animals well under the market price, I would really be setting myself up to having more flipping like that. When people think about the value and the cost of reptiles, usually what they're thinking about are supplies like rodents and electricity, caging, substrate, things like that. The things that you go through on a regular basis. But they often overlook two really critical factors, and that's the time and the risk. And so, first of all, the time, people ask me, well, do you take into account the time that you spend caring for these animals? in your valuation and price determinations? And the answer is no, and it's because this is my love. This is what I do because I love the animals. I got into this as a hobby because I enjoy working with them. And if I had to pay myself the amount of hours that I put into this, there's no way I could ever break even with all the hours I put in over the years. And I don't care because, as I said, I love doing this. I love these animals. I really want to be working with them. If I wanted to make more money with my time, I work in a full-time job in an unrelated field. I could easily do consulting and make a hell of a lot more money than I'm doing putting the time into the boas. But that's fine with me. It's my life choice, and I just love working with these animals. So the second thing that we have to consider is the risk. And that's really not taken into account. And I mentioned risk with real estate. The house price can drop. You can, lose your shirt on when you sell the house. But when you think about boas, especially, there's a huge risk getting into breeding projects that they may not be successful. And I don't have any real precise estimate, but I would say that for every successful boa breeder out there, there's got to be at least 10 people who tried to be a boa breeder and weren't successful. Either, the boas didn't breed for them, or more likely they just got out. They just gave up. It was too challenging. They had other things come up, and, they didn't stay in for the long haul. So you got to think about the person who ultimately was successful. They overcame that risk, that so many others were not able to overcome. And you really have to consider that. I mean, there's a reason why there's so few people breeding boas, especially locality boas. It's not easy, and there are a hell of a lot easier ways to make money really fast than breeding boas. When we talk about risk, we also have to look at the other projects that the breeder had that weren't successful that year. So when we talk about a breeder who's been in it for quite a while, and they've gotten somewhat established. Let's say they have 10 breeding pairs going, in any given year. And so let's say they're really lucky and they get 7 of the 10 are gravid. And that would be a really good result if you had 7 pairings out of 10, or 70%, that resulted in a gravid female. Let's say they have those 7 gravid females, and then after a few months, they discover one of them isn't acting gravid anymore. They thought it was gravid, but unfortunately it wasn't. So really it was only 6. And then let's say one of those 6 ends up slugging out, just having this massive litter of slugs. Things go okay, the female's all right, but there's no baby. So that brings it down to 5. And then we have another female who has some difficulty giving birth and passes a few stillborn offspring. And then you rush her to the vet. Luckily, you have a good reptile vet who's able to deliver the remainder of the stillborn offspring. The female makes it, which is great. Sometimes females don't make it, and actually I did a video entitled When Breeding Goes Wrong. So check out that video for all of the really disastrous things that can happen with breeding. But for the sake of this simulation, let's say your female makes it. So that brings you down to a total of 4 litters, okay, of the 10 that are successful. And let's say you have 2 of them that just blow your expectations. One of them, you got 25 red tails, 2 red tails. The other one, let's say you have 15. These are beautiful babies. Everything goes great. You just feel, over the moon about those. And let's say you have 2 other litters. One of them you only get 3 babies. Although they're nice babies, it's just a little small. And now the other litter you get 8 babies and a bunch of slugs. This simulation is fairly realistic based on my own experience and the experiences of other people that I've talked to, other breeders. And people like to think that things are just going to go perfectly for them. Unfortunately, it's rarely the case with breeding boas or really anything in life. But now let's get back to, you have your 4 litters, you have some beautiful animals, very valuable on the market. You're able to sell the true red tails at a premium price because the prices have been going up lately. And you're able to take in money that's going to fund the remainder of your breeding projects that didn't get successful, as well as your next year's breeding efforts. And so when you think about the prices of these babies, you really have to consider all the other projects that weren't successful. The breeder has to pay for those, and they have to keep their colony going if they're going to stay in the game and breed another year. So you have to think about that, the projects that didn't make it, when you're thinking about the value and the prices of boas and other reptiles. And so a lot of people think, well, it's not fair, why should I have to pay these really expensive prices? Ultimately, it's not the breeder that sets the prices, it's the market. And so in a free market society, if you think the price is too high, then you don't have to pay the price. And in fact, I would encourage you, do not pay more than you think an animal or really anything is worth. And you know, there's a good chance the price might come down. Maybe if these prices are due to COVID, maybe if the COVID thing ever goes away, the prices will go back down. People have to go back to work. They don't have the time for the reptiles. Maybe a lot of people will sell all their reptiles. And so you're free to wait around for that. You're free to buy animals that you don't think are overpriced. And I would encourage you again not to pay more than you think a reptile is worth. These reptiles are luxury items. It's not like food or water or medicine or things like that that are basic needs for, you know, to survive. No one has a need to own a reptile any more than they do to own an expensive watch or a luxury car. So you're free not to buy the reptile if you think that the price is too high. And in fact, there's a lot of really cool reptiles that I've looked at over the years and thought about maybe picking some up. But with the current prices these days, there's no way I could justify spending that kind of money either. So I'm in the same boat as a lot of you guys. But the main point I wanted to make is that unless you've gone through all the hard work and risk and time, put all of your blood, sweat, and tears into trying to breed these animals, please don't just dismiss it as greed, because there are very few people, if any, who are breeding reptiles for the sake of greed. Thought I'd grab a different snake. The snake that I showed before, by the way, was a crawl key boa. This is a longicata, a long-tail boa. Thought I'd, you know, keep the theme today to the beautiful, darker, you know, and anerythristic looking type boas like this one. And so the next thing I wanted to bring up that came up a lot in the comments was about the fate of the reptile market now that the prices are going to be so high. And one of the things that kind of worries me is that most people, when they get into reptiles, they're teenagers or some even younger. You know, my first snakes I got when I was 6 or 7 actually, and I was really into them as a teenager. And teenagers don't have a whole lot of money. You know, they're doing mowing lawns and doing odd jobs to try to make some money. And a lot of teenagers, myself included, get into colubrids as their first reptiles that they work with. In fact, I was working with corn snakes and king snakes, garter snakes, etc. when I was a teenager. And up until recently, there were a lot of colubrids that were available in the $50 price range. And that $50 to a teenager, that's a pretty good chunk of money. Not a fortune, but there's a lot of work that they would have to do to make $50. And so these days, these same colubrids are typically in the $150 to $200 price range. So I worry about teenagers who are the future of the reptile hobby being priced out. And if they're not able to get into the hobby, what's going to happen to the hobby, you know, 10, 20, 30 years from now? Is it just going to be for rich people? And then, you know, who are going to be the people who ultimately have more money to spend? You know, the teenagers now, 10, 20 years from now, they're going to have more money and they're going to be able to get into higher end projects. But if they don't get into reptiles to begin with because they can't afford it, it's not going to happen. And that's kind of a worry of mine. So another point I wanted to make, there were a lot of comparisons in the comments to breeding dogs. And, you know, the price of a dog, a purebred dog, has gone up about the same rate as prices of boas and other reptiles, and really prices of anything due to inflation. Right now you're looking at pretty much anywhere from about $1,000 to several $1,000s for most purebred dogs. You know, some of them can be many times that, but for kind of a pet quality dog, you're looking at $1,000 to like $3,000 or $4,000. And so when you think about dogs, it's a totally different ball game. I don't want to compare breeding snakes to dogs. There's a bunch of different considerations you have to think about. But there are aspects of breeding boas that make it even more challenging than breeding dogs. For example, boas have to be a lot older. It takes a lot more time to breed them than breeding dogs. Boas can be a lot harder to come by as far as getting breeding stock. It can be a lot more difficult to get successful mating. etc. So I would think that the prices of pets in general have been going up, and there are a lot of considerations that affect the pet market, that affect dog prices, that also apply to boas. One thing that I saw as far as breeding dogs that kind of struck me as kind of weird is this concept called breeding rights. And so if you buy a purebred dog, apparently in many cases it's going to come neutered or spayed, so it can't breed unless you pay extra. And it's a lot extra. In some cases it's like twice the price if you want the breeding rights so that you can breed the animal. When it comes to dogs, the majority of people, they're buying a dog as a pet. They're not going to breed it, as it should be, for a number of reasons. But so most people are not going to buy the breeding rights because they don't want to breed the dog. When it comes to boas and other reptiles, a lot of people are only buying the animal for the potential for it to breed. And this is especially true with morph animals. In fact, I would speculate that probably 90–95% of the price of a lot of morphs is due to their reproductive potential. After all, who's going to spend $3,000 or $4,000 for a scoria or a leucocystic, Princess Diamond boa if it's not going to breed? If you want a boa as a pet, there are plenty of animals in the $200 to $500 price range. So why would you pay many thousands of dollars for an animal unless it was to breed it? And so I would think that if boa breeders started to charge extra for breeding rights, say we could just have our animals spayed or neutered or sterilized in some fashion and limit the breedability of them, I think if any reptile breeder tried to do something like that, it would be met with outrage. And no one would put up with somebody deliberately making an animal so it can't breed. And in fact, I want people to breed my animals. One of the reasons I do this channel is to freely share my breeding information. So hopefully a lot of you guys who acquire my boas will be able to breed them. There'll be more of them and the hobby will continue. That's kind of the whole goal of this channel. So I would never want to limit the ability of these animals to breed. But with regard to the dogs, there's a whole different calculation with a lot of unwanted dogs in shelters and people breeding the dogs who clearly shouldn't be breeding them. So I can kind of understand why someone would want to limit their breeding ability. But I don't think that this is something that would be tolerated with the reptile market. And I also really wonder if we would even have morph boas, some of the more expensive ones, unless they were able to reproduce. And the person could justify spending the thousands and thousands of dollars to acquire the breeding stock. And in fact, I would say that really what's preventing people from breeding them is that in many cases boas are a lot harder to breed than it seems. And things step in the way, someone doesn't stick with the project long enough, they have to get rid of the boas, they move to a different house, they can't keep the boas, etc. There are a lot of reasons why people get out of breeding. Back to my original estimate that probably for every person who wants to be a boa breeder, probably only about 1 out of 10 are actually successful in becoming boa breeders. And that's really what limits the reproduction of these animals. And so I'd like to hear from you guys, what percentage of the value of a boa, especially an expensive morph boa, do you think is solely due to its future reproductive potential? So please comment below if you have a thought on that. When I was thinking about this video, I thought it would be a quick reaction video, but I've rambled on for quite some time. So I'm just going to cut to the final part of this video, which is the name of this beautiful anerythristic paraguana peninsula boa. And so I put up 5 choices which were suggested by you guys into a poll, and you guys voted and we have the results. And so the name of this guy is Anubis. And that was the leading choice with 43% of the vote for Anubis. Anubis is the Egyptian god of the underworld and death. Really cool. Also the guardian of the underworld. So, cool image for this particular animal given the looks of him. In second place was Morpheus at 30%. In third place, Vinny at 15%. And so I kind of liked Vinny actually because it kind of had a tough guy image associated with it, but since the vote was Anubis, we're going to go with the will of the voters at this channel. And so thanks everybody for voting. Thanks also for all your suggestions. There were a lot of other cool names that were suggested that didn't make it to the original poll for this guy. So I'll keep those in mind if I'm going to be naming a boa in the future. Anyway, I hope you guys liked this video. As always, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot me a line. Thanks for watching and enjoy your boas.